Hello, my name is Weronika. I'm a member of Anima International Poland, so Otwarte Klatki. And I've been working for this organization for 6 years now as a volunteer. Throughout that time, I've been doing a variety of diverse tasks. However, for the last 3 years, my main focus were aquatic animals. And this part of my activism actually started when I joined our campaign against live carp sales. So today, I'd like to talk a little bit about the campaign itself, but also about why and how we decided to end it and not to continue our actions. Let's start from giving some context for those of you who might not be so familiar with the issue of live carp sales. It's actually a very local tradition and a very local problem for activists, as only in a few countries of Middle Eastern Europe, it's common to eat live carp sales for Christmas. The tradition originated around 100 years ago, in 1940s, when it was very highly promoted to eat carp for Christmas. And at that time, fish was considered a true luxury. It was not common for people to have refrigerators or other effective ways of storing food. It was quite hard to actually have the fish fresh. It was a true luxury to be able to have fresh fish on your Christmas. And so the government, wanting to motivate the laborers, the workers of the factories, started giving out fish, live fish, as a Christmas bonus to some workers. This was actually quite a success, and the tradition of buying live carp sales has originated at that time. And even though no one receives the fish for free anymore, it's still common for live carps to be visible in Poland, in our marketplaces, in our shops, every year around the Christmas season. And as you may imagine, there are several welfare issues related to live fish sales. First of all, what you can see in this photo very well, the tanks and pools where fish are stored and transported are heavily overcrowded. There is just too many fish in too small containers. And this causes several further issues actually, because it not only causes a lot of stress to the fish to be so crowded, it also impacts the quality of water, the amount of oxygen in it, and the amount of carbon dioxide. Quite often, which is not the case here, but it's, well, quite common, you can see blood or mud in the water. So it does not seem to be suitable for any fish, and certainly not for fish who have to spend a few days in this kind of water. Some other common issues include dead fish being stored together with live fish. And you can see that in this photo, there are some fish literally upside down in the water. So you can just imagine how stressful it must be for the live ones to float around bodies of other fish who died in this place. And having that in mind, many organizations fight against live carp sales. It's not actually like a new fight. In fact, the oldest actions against live carp sales that we managed to track were from 1998. So that's 25 years of fighting against the problem. And that's a lot, considering that actually the whole movement against abusing fish has actually developed in recent years. So that's a fairly long way we've been through in Poland. In 2018, together with 3 other organizations, we decided to launch a campaign focused on corporate outreach to make live carp unavailable. And the campaign was actually a huge success. In quite a short time, we managed to get 7 declarations from major nets of supermarkets in Poland that they will not sell carps anymore. And quite an important part is that most of them stopped selling carps immediately. So the next Christmas, the carps were not available anymore. So that's way faster than transition periods with chickens or eggs, etc., etc. So everything was going well. At some point, I became the coordinator of the campaign on our side, in Otwarte Klatki. And after Christmas in 2020, for the first time, we had a team that was only made up of volunteers. This actually changed a lot, as previously the campaign was conducted by a professional activist, who throughout a majority of the year had a more important point of focus than fish. So the campaign was only going on for a few weeks before Christmas. And that actually made sense, because this was the only time when the campaign was loud, when the problem was in media, and there was a huge chance to actually do something in this season. However, as we now had volunteers who did not devote a majority of year to another problem, we decided to keep the team working after Christmas. And what we did was researching other ways we can help fish, and in general getting some more expertise in fish-related issues. Before that, I wouldn't say there was much knowledge on fish in the organization, as we never held a campaign that really required us to be knowledgeable of fish welfare. So we researched a lot about fish farming, about fish needs, about welfare, about how neglected fish are actually, and what we can do about it. And we came about a very worrisome piece of information. And the information was not actually about carp. It was about, our activists fighting against carp sales. And the information was about salmon, actually. And it was not about salmon itself. It was about what salmons eat. So the issue is that different kinds of fish require very different kinds of feed. Carps are mostly herbivorous fish, so they eat almost only plants, and that's what they are fed at farms. Sometimes, so animal-derived products are added to the feed, which is represented by this small red fish. However, salmons are carnivorous, and they must be fed almost solely with other fish. The whole chain of production looks like that. Huge ships come to usually southern half of globe to fish a lot of animals at once from ocean, usually with quite a lot of bycatch actually. Then they turn the fish into fish meal and fish oil, which are high protein and high calorie products. And these products are then used to feed the salmons. And actually this slide is not representative at all, as there are very diverse opinions on how many fish a salmon eats before it's slaughtered. And the smallest number I found so far is from Global Reporting Program, and it's 147 fish. So that's a lot, actually. However, the highest number of fish eaten by salmon comes from Compassion in World Farming Report, and it's 350 fish. What this actually means is that buying carp supports suffering of the carp and perhaps a little bit of feed fish, while buying salmon supports not only suffering of the salmon, but also the death of a few hundred more animals. And now, how is that connected to our campaign? Well, we had this anecdotal observation that some people in our families, among our friends, stopped buying live carp sales for, well, quite diverse reasons. But once they stop buying live carps, they see no point in buying carp at all for Christmas. So they substitute it with better quality fish. Carp is generally not a luxury anymore. It's said to taste like mud. I honestly don't remember. I haven't eaten carp in a while, and I'm not planning to eat it anytime soon. However, people generally say that carp is not very tasty, and it's not eaten throughout a majority of the year due to that reason. So once they break up with the tradition, they choose a higher quality product, which is quite often salmon. Salmon is a luxury. It's a fish you can find in quite many luxurious restaurants. It's the kind of food you really want to eat. It's tasty. And we kind of had this thought that if due to our actions and due to our campaigns, some people will stop buying live carps and instead will buy processed salmon, then our actions may actually cause more suffering than they spare. In Poland, roughly 4,000 tons of carp is sold live each year. And at some point, I made a huge and complex estimation, including the amount of fish ate by carp, the weight of carp, and the mortality of carp, etc., etc. And I counted that 40 tons of carp, which is 1% of the amount yearly sold in Poland, is around 160,000 fish deaths. So that's a lot. However, the same amount of salmon in weight is accountable for around 1,870,000 fish deaths. That's 11-fold the number of carps. And in general, we can see that if 1% of the currently sold live carp by weight is replaced by the same amount of salmon, there are additional 1,710,000 fish deaths. That's quite a lot, actually. And at that point, we had one actual question, because we only knew that people substitute carp with salmon because we observed that it was not a scientific proof. And we did not know whether this would actually happen in real life, whether this would be a situation. So we paid for a public opinion poll, and the poll was actually very short. It only had 2 questions. The first one was, are you planning to buy live carp for Christmas this year? The poll was held in November, so I'd say that a majority of people already had an idea of what they're gonna do for Christmas. And 1 in 4 adults in Poland said, yes, I'm planning to buy live carp. And among those who answered yes, we asked one more question. How will you substitute live carp in case it's not available? And kind of like we expected, a lot of people said that they would just buy frozen or otherwise processed carp. However, the second most common choice was the salmon that we worried about a lot, and that was almost 24%. And then the third most common option was trout. Trout is an omnivorous fish, so it's somewhere between salmon and carp when it comes to the amount of fish eaten by it. And taking that into account, I estimated that replacing carp by salmon may cause up to 4,869,000 deaths in case we make carp absolutely unavailable in Poland by, for example, introducing a ban. So that's a lot. But actually, this is a very conservative and very optimistic estimation. As already mentioned, the data was not very agreeable when it comes to the number of fish eaten by salmons. And to estimate that, I counted the smallest possible number, 147. So if we take the number from other sources and we count 350 fish, that would be over twice this much. And having this estimation, having these numbers, actually made us wonder about the sense of the campaign at all. Because, all right, it might be counterproductive. We don't know that. We had some doubts about it. However, there are so many other things to consider, so many other factors. And we collected a lot of feedback, both from people inside Anima International and from organizations that are cooperating with us. Also from comments in our Effective Altruism forum blog, where we posted an article explaining all the situation with all details. We received a lot of very useful comments with valid points around the campaign. And some of the most important ones included the fact that wild fish suffering is not at all comparable to farmed fish suffering. We only cause suffering of wild fish when we, kill them. So that's a few minutes up to a few hours of their lives. While farmed fish suffer due to, human actions throughout their whole lives. So in case of carp, it's like 2 up to 3 years. And that's not much comparable to each other. On the other hand, the way that wild fish are killed is very cruel, Quite often they die by being crushed by other fish in massive nets. Sometimes they're frozen to death, or they're just suffocating for a few hours before they die. So this is still a lot of pain out there. Then there was this problem with weak data sources. In quite many situations, we did not have enough actual data that we could trust to estimate the exact numbers, which makes things harder. Because if two quite reliable organizations have very different information about the outcome of farming carps when it comes to fishing wild animals, then there is kind of no reason to trust any of them more. Then we have several issues that are related to overfishing. So overfishing caused by feeding salmons is an issue mostly in Global South, where there are quite poor and poorly executed legal requirements and limitations when it comes to fishing. So when ships come, they just deplete the whole ocean in this area of fish, which puts the local people who have been fishing for generations at a risk of starvation. And there is actually a great document about it on YouTube by The Guardian, which I highly recommend. I think the title is How Chinese Ships Destroy Gambia's Water. It's available on YouTube for free, and it's like half an hour. I believe it's really worth watching. And then there is this problem with negotiability of our impact on wild fish suffering, because there is this interesting cycle in wild fish that the more of them are fished, the smaller the population gets. So as a result, the prices go higher. So the demand falls, and as a result, fewer fish are fished in the next year. So it's hard to actually tell how much we impact the fish deaths. And then there are some arguments for and against the campaign itself, even ignoring this salmon problem. For example, the campaign might have some impact on developing ethical eating habits in our society. For many people, deciding not to buy the live carp might be the first step towards choosing to eliminate other suffering-related products from the diet. Maybe the first step to become vegetarian, who knows? Then there is this fish advocacy value. Polish fish protection law is very weak and very poorly executed. So having this ban on live carp sales would be an important step towards making better and better improvements when it comes to legal requirements of treating fish in a certain way. And finally, there is some visible impact on the fish sales campaign when it comes to general attitudes towards fish. So when people are used to seeing fish suffering and not reacting to that, that may make them even less empathic towards fish in the future. So this might be some very poor impact, especially on children and young people. And other than that, there are quite many arguments that I did not squeeze in this slide, because you would not be able to see them all. So for example, the campaign was only about around 2 million carps per year, which is a relatively small number compared to, for example, 1 billion chickens that are killed in Poland each year. So the scale itself might make it less effective compared to our actions. But in the end, the main argument that decided on me closing the campaign was that otwarte klatki and, well, animal movement in general have quite limited resources. At that time, it was post-pandemic, so we had fewer volunteers than usually. And also, the workforce was very needed in our other campaigns, which were more critical to us. And the campaign against live carp sales was taking time of free experienced volunteers who could have committed to other campaigns and make a bigger change for the animals. It also took some of our financial resources and space in social media, etc., etc. So in the end, due to all these doubts around the campaign, we decided not to continue it any longer. Not because it's counter-effective, which might be the case, but because we have no clue whether that's actually pointless, or maybe that makes sense in the end for the greater good of improving animal welfare in Poland in the future. So what are your opinions? Was this effective? Was this counter-effective? What arguments were missed in this presentation? Which arguments were not valid? That's the moment where I'd like you to use your Eventory app and note your opinions, note your doubts, express your questions, or maybe say that you do not agree for some reason. And let's get a discussion here.
Thank you, Weronika, for the presentation. And there are a few questions already. Okay, now it's working. What's the process in the organization after the estimations have been made? Is there denial in the team, or everybody just accepts new reality? So this happened a while ago, but what was the reasoning back then?
That's a great question, actually. And I think I kind of missed that in my presentation. So Anima International is very open to feedback and very reactive to any information that is for or against our campaigns or for and against our effectiveness. So when I first expressed those doubts, and I wrote down like a Google Doc with my estimations, I sent it to my supervisor, who then sent it to other people. And in fact, the document went around Anima International very quickly. And I received a lot of feedback. The thing that complicated the situation was that it was, well, November. We already had huge plans for December. We already had some plans when it comes to marketing, to using like billboards, to directing our actions to certain stakeholders, to make our actions effective. And the plan was very different from the previous years. So we had like great hopes when it comes to this. But due to like our general attitudes and the huge doubts we have, without much time to actually delve into that before Christmas, we decided to limit the campaign very much in this season. So we basically did almost nothing during this Christmas, except for posting some content in like social media, which we considered not to have much impact while still making the problem visible. So it was like a golden point for us. But after Christmas, when we had more time to actually deep dive into this, we also got some expertise from Aquatic Animal Institute, who did a little bit of research for us to confirm our doubts. We decided that there is no point in continuing the campaign, so we suspended it. And as for now, well, I wouldn't say the campaign is closed. I mean, we're not doing it anymore. But in case we come up to a conclusion that it might be effective in the future, if a situation changes, then I think we might want to continue it. But this should be like a very careful decision, and we can't do it on impulse, definitely.
Thanks for the answer. Just a note to the audience, that you don't have to limit yourselves to questions. You can also post some observations on the effectiveness of the campaign. But another one sort of fulfills both the requirements. So what do you think about the concept that at the beginning you go through a negative phase in order to have the ultimate result later on? For example, in Germany, a meat company introduced a vegetarian sausage with 70% egg that killed more animals than pork sausage. But for them, it was the foot in the door. And by now, they have purely vegan cold cuts and kicked out the egg sausage. So I guess that's also an argument on the effectiveness.
That's an argument that has been considered, actually, because we had this thought that, as already mentioned, this might be a step that will help achieve a greater good, which are better restrictions on treating fish in Poland. However, the greater good argument has actually a pretty bad track record, as quite often we can foresee quite well what happens in the nearest future, but it's very hard to foresee what happens in far future. And as a result, we could do some harm expecting to have some greater good in the future, and the greater good might not happen, actually. And also, it's actually hard to quantify, hard to estimate how much this kind of regulation of live carp sales would actually contribute to any further regulations. Also, there is this issue with Polish animal protection law that in theory it has been protecting fish for 25 years now, so that's a lot of time. And during that time, only once anyone has been sentenced for abusing fish. And the whole process to get this person sentenced, actually there were three people working in Leclerc, for abusing wildlife carps during sales. The whole process in court took 11.5 years. Despite having clear evidence, there was like videos showing who abused fish, how abused it. There were cameras. You could clearly see that the people were guilty of it. And the case was twice in the highest court in Poland. You can just imagine how ridiculous it was, right? And it actually was a case that could have been resolved within one meeting, because there are clear legal cues that it is punishable to abuse fish. So there was actually no need to continue it for 11.5 years. So we kind of don't have much trust in how it would be executed if we introduced higher welfare requirements for fish. And while it would be for sure executed that you can't sell live carps because it's very visible and very easily like punishable, then introducing higher welfare requirements by law might not be that effective.
I think, as far as I remember, for this trial, there was also an issue of some legal expert posing that fish are incapable of experiencing suffering. And maybe this also lines up with an argument in favor of effectiveness of the campaign, that this is one of the few areas in the media when we even have the leverage to talk about the fact that fish do suffer. That's one of the few contacts people have in everyday life with live fish here in Poland. So.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. That's a very valid argument. And I absolutely agree that it's ridiculous that it must have been proven by experts in the court that fish are capable of feeling pain. Meanwhile, fish are vertebrates, and Polish law states that all vertebrates are under protection of animal protection law. So they were kinda under protection anyway. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah. There's a few of them. So another question: are you doing anything else now, like promoting not eating fish for Christmas, telling people about the suffering of fish, etc.?
Well, sometimes we happen to post content related to live carp sales, but it's not anymore about making it illegal or petitions, etc. It's more like react if you see that dead fish are there, or there is blood in the water. If you see that the fish are abused, call the police. And actually people do that, so that's good. And also people send us a lot of videos or photos of the live carps that they see at shops, and we have very graphic images of that, which I decided not to include in the presentation, as I know it might be triggering for quite many people. So if you want to see the photos of the blood being everywhere and internal organs being outside of the fish, let's say, I encourage you to contact me, and I will be able to just show it to you in more detail.
Okay. Another question. Thank you, Weronika, for this session and your work. I wonder what are experiences of other countries that succeeded in banning live fish of some sort?
Banning live carp sales is a local problem. It's in just a few countries in Central Eastern Europe where live carps are sold for Christmas. So it's not a huge problem worldwide. And as far as I know, I don't think any country in this region actually banned it. So we don't have this kind of experience. It might be that there may be similar regulations in countries where it's a case that live animals are sold in general in wet markets. But I'm not aware of this kind of lobbying introduced anywhere in Europe. And I can see another person confirming that just now from the audience.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have no precedent, which I guess makes it even harder to research.
However, what I think is worth noting is that both in Poland and abroad, there are organizations actively fighting for this kind of regulations.
Okay, so are you saying that in some other Central or Eastern European countries, those campaigns remain? And even in Poland, are other organizations still fighting for this in favor of that?
Well, there are. And I wouldn't say the fight is as intense as it used to be, but the problem is still very vivid in media every year, even without our contribution, which, by the way, is also an interesting argument, kind of for and kind of against the campaign, because it's not a neglected problem anymore if other people are working on it. So we kind of have more impact than we may have in other areas that are not as commonly fought in Poland.
Okay, we're still good with time, so some other questions. Have you been thinking or analyzing in a way how would the campaign affect the awareness regarding animal welfare if you were able to push it to legislative ban? Don't you think it would also have a big impact in the future on other animal welfare issues in your country?
Well, I do. I already mentioned that kind of in the previous slide, actually. It's hard to foresee the exact impact, but for sure, kind of getting people to understand that we can't abuse fish because fish are sentient might have some impact on the general attitudes towards fish, but towards other animals as well. However, it's very hard to quantify it and very hard to put it against the numbers we have and the specific data we have, even if the data is fluid and sometimes it does not agree with other data we have. We still have some concept of our impact on live carp sales in numbers, but we don't have a specific concept of the impact of the ban. However, I think it's worth noting that in Anima International, there was this interesting case, actually, that we collected feedback from a lot of people in our organizations, including some very experienced activists who have been working in animal movement for many years. And generally, the most experienced activists were the ones who said that it might be worth continuing the campaign anyway. So for less experienced people, the data was more relevant, but for the experienced activists, they quite often disagreed that this unclear impact on people's attitudes is as important. Actually, they said that some worth it might have in the future might be a sufficient reason to consider continuing the campaign. And as some of you may know, intuition of experts is quite often not a proof, but something you should really listen to. So that was a worry for us also, and we took that into account while deciding about the campaign.
I suppose maintaining the public awareness of the topic or general the fish welfare area would be an argument in favor of that, right? Or what was the main argument for the expert? Was it anything beyond intuition?
Intuition is sometimes a sufficient argument, I'd say. But yeah, they generally said mostly the things that I already mentioned, so that it's hard to tell whether this campaign is actually net negative. However, they were all around this estimation salmons versus carps. And when we took into account other factors around the campaign, for example, the small number of animals it impacts, we kind of came to the conclusion that it's not the most effective thing to do anyway. So even without the salmon problem, it might not be the campaign where we should actually put our resources. So this was actually, I think, the strongest argument against these opinions that benefits outweighed the negative impact.
Okay, so I'll go through the remaining two observations and questions. So the next one is just an observation that I think often people go vegetarian first and then start eating even more animals, like by replacing meat by cheese. I feel this is a similar problem. So.
Yeah, I think there is a similarity actually in this situation, though it's hard to actually put it next to each other. As I think that vegetarians are usually kind of aware that other animal-derived products than meat also impact suffering of animals, while for the whole society, actually, except for a few people, it's not obvious that salmons eat a different thing than carp, and that it can impact their impact on fish, basically. So it's actually kind of hard to compare it in that way. However, I still think it's a really good comparison. Yeah.
Have we ever took the stand publicly regarding why we are resigning from this campaign, why we are abandoning it? So have we released this information to the public that, well, salmons are a bad alternative to live carp even?
Actually, we were very careful about communicating this. Because first of all, we already, as mentioned, had like 7 declarations for huge retailers that they will not sell live carps anymore. And it could impact our reliability if we suddenly, were entirely transparent in our social media that our campaign was actually like negatable, let's say, if that's a word. And however, we were very transparent around it in our charity movement. So we posted a very long article in Effective Altruism Forum, and I think that was the main point that actually impacted opinions in the movement. And also that's the reasons why I'm here actually. The post was fairly loud, way louder than we expected. However, when it comes to posting about specifically this relationship between carp and salmon, I wouldn't say we posted much content of this type, as it's fairly hard to understand for people. And also it would be very hard to post it without encouraging people to eat other fish. We are not an abolitionistic organization. We are very careful about, making people vegan straight away. But I don't think we would like to post content that will encourage eating one fish because it's better than another fish. However, we had some content and articles in our blog, in our social media, about salmon and the exact problem with this fish consumption by other fish that are then consumed by humans. So I think for those who followed us, this was already some source of information. It was just not together with this carp communication.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just last question. I'll leave you with some 5 minutes to conclude. So this one is actually quite valid, I think. Did you take into consideration the possible difference between claim and questionnaire and actual act of buying carp salmon at the end of the day? Asking mostly because carp is cheaper and salmon could be inaccessible meat for older or poorer people.
Yeah, we did. That's the short response. And a longer response is that actually, I study applied psychology. I'm kind of aware that people say one thing and then do very different thing. So if the results of the poll was that 3% would switch to salmon, there would be a great reason to be very careful around it. However, as it's almost 24%, I think we can count that at least some 10-15% would actually do that, even if it's not the full 24%. And on the other hand, it could happen the other way around, so more people could buy salmon than declared. And, well, it's hard to actually be careful around this kind of data, but I think we have a sufficient margin to take that into consideration in this case. And also just the fact that the next species of fish in the queue, so trout, is also not herbivorous, is an argument here as well. And regarding the price of salmon, it's actually been falling a bit in recent years. So I'd say it's becoming more common because the price difference is shrinking.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so thank you for the Q&A. Please stay for the 5-minute summary. Thank you.
So my response to the whole question around effectiveness is it effective? Well, maybe. I don't know. I don't think we know it for sure. And a main takeaway I'd like you to have after this speech is that we don't close a campaign because it's counter-effective. We close the campaign because we have no proof that it is effective. And actually, it's in discussion, it's not another person must prove you to be incorrect. You must prove yourself to be correct in your opinion. And the same way, in actions, we should not continue actions because there is no reason to think they are counter-effective. We should continue actions because we believe that they are effective. And we should strongly consider our actions if we think they might not be efficient anymore. And in this case, I'd like to thank a lot of people who actually supported this whole situation. As already mentioned, we received a lot of feedback from internal and external activists, for which I'm very grateful. And some of them are today in the audience today, so I'd like to thank them also. And as the end, I'd like to thank you for listening and encourage you to contact me in the future for some more information. If you have some doubts, if you have some arguments, maybe you come up with something that will be very helpful for us. Maybe you have some thoughts that will actually be needed, that will actually change our mind. So I'm very open to that. And I think the best way to contact me is to use my email, which I encourage you strongly, or Eventory, which might be easier for you as we're still in CARE conference. So that's all from my side. Thank you.